Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a palace courtyard just before dusk, somewhere deep in the heart of ancient Korea. The air smells like sandalwood smoke and freshly oiled hairpins. You hear the soft clink of jade pendants as robed figures drift into place. You think it's a ceremony, but then someone flips a 10-foot silk sleeve with the gravitas of a thunderclap, and suddenly, it's a dance. The drumbeat is slower than your heartbeat, and the performers' expressions are so serene, they make statues look emotional. It's beautiful, strange, slow, and hypnotic, and also, to your very modern brain, kind of hilarious. There are fans, masks, bird gestures, and enough dramatic eyebrow work to fill a K-drama season. You're about to discover why ancient Korean court dances weren't just performances, they were political theater, spiritual ritual, and sometimes deeply confusing interpretive mime. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're sitting cross-legged on the polished stone floor, which is very clean but not especially warm. Your back is aching, but you can't shift. Someone's already frowned at you for breathing too enthusiastically. You're in the royal court of the Joseon dynasty, mid-ceremony, and you've been told in very polite but firm terms that absolutely nothing you're about to see will make sense. That's not a warning, it's a promise. The dancers arrive, gliding into the space like ghosts with excellent posture. Their robes are the softest greens, pale oranges, and faded golds like fruit left out in the sun. Some have towering black headdresses. Others have their hair knotted into coils you suspect could deflect arrows. And they're all carrying fans. Not small, sensible fans. Massive, elaborately painted folding fans the size of cafe umbrellas. And they begin to move not quickly. Oh no, this is not a tap dancing situation. Each fan opens like the slow yawn of a cat. One dancer steps forward, then back, then lifts her fan so high you worry she'll strain a shoulder. Another swirls her sleeve in a figure 8 so precise it could be used for mathematics. This is the first royal jongjae, a genre of traditional court dance that dates back to at least the 7th century. Though it flourished under the Goryeo and Joseon dynasties, it combines ritual, Confucian ideology, visual symbolism, and very deliberate slowness. You're watching a fusion of high art and royal messaging wrapped in silk and embroidered poetry. There's a basic historical fact. The court dances weren't created just to look pretty. They were spiritual offerings, reflections of social harmony, and ways to communicate royal power without saying a word. The king didn't dance, but he commissioned, approved, and interpreted every step. Now, let's talk about those sleeves. You notice once you're past the initial hypnosis that sleeve work is 70% of the choreography. They flap, they ripple, they point at invisible geese. Some historians suggest the exaggerated sleeves were meant to magnify gestures in a time before eyeglasses. Others argue they represent clouds, or virtue, or both. Still others think the sleeves simply looked fabulous when thrown dramatically in the air. Historians still argue whether the sleeve was originally a symbolic tool or just a useful bit of flair that gained meaning over time. You try not to laugh when one dancer's sleeve nearly knocks over a ceremonial vase. No one else blinks. You, however, are beginning to suspect you've missed a step somewhere, possibly the one where they explain what the dance is about. The truth is, no one in the foreign delegation next to you understands either. The visiting envoy from Ryukyu is squinting so hard he's developed a new wrinkle. The Qing delegate has adopted a look of reverent confusion. And the poor envoy from the Dutch East India Company, well, he's already perspiring through 3 layers of formal wool. What you're seeing might be Cheoyangmu, one of Korea's oldest surviving court dances, named after a mythical figure who wore a smiling mask to ward off evil spirits. Or it might be Seonyu, the dance of the ferry boats, inspired by the Taoist imagery of immortals sailing across clouds. Both are famous. Both include steps that involve smiling solemnly while pretending to row an invisible boat across an imaginary sky. Your mind drifts, just slightly. The fans click open again. You smell candle wax and lotus root. Somewhere, a zither string hums like a thought being born. You glance left. The Ryukyu envoy is nodding slowly, You're not sure if he's enlightened or asleep. Then it happens. One of the dancers, a young woman with braids like silk ropes, steps forward and stares directly at you, not aggressively, but with the kind of calm intensity that says, I see you, and yes, I did mean to swirl my sleeve at your soul. You freeze. This moment isn't about you. It's about the dance, the ancestors, the 1,000-year tradition of masked expression and controlled elegance, but also, it might just be about you. Now, here, breathing too loudly in the royal viewing gallery, the performance ends with no fanfare, just a soft gong and the dancers gliding backward, as if unrolling time. You realize you haven't moved for nearly 30 minutes. Your legs are numb, your soul is soothed, and you're still unsure what just happened. The envoy from the Dutch East India Company claps politely. He's the only one. You make a mental note. Next time, bring a fan. Not to dance with, just to hide behind when the sleeves start flying. You're still sitting there, your legs now gently tingling from lack of circulation, when a court official in a hat shaped suspiciously like a flattened lantern gives you the most delicate nod you've ever received. It means the show's not over just shifting. You shift with it, figuratively, physically. Your legs have yet to forgive you. Now the musicians arrive. They don't exactly sneak in, but they move like people who would apologize for breathing too loudly. Each one carries an instrument shaped either like a flattened turtle or a really confident fish. The drums are square. The flutes curve like reeds. There's even a wooden tiger, its back carved into ridges that get scratched rhythmically with a stick. That's not a joke. It's called the EO. And it sounds like a wooden sneeze if a sneeze were dignified and trying to earn a degree in Confucian studies. The performers re-enter not the same ones. These dancers are older, more serious. One has eyebrows that could start a rebellion if angled just so. They carry no fans this time. Instead, they bring themselves, their sleeves, and the full weight of expectation. This is when the foreign diplomats start sweating. Diplomatic missions in Joseon, Korea were high-stakes affairs, full of silent protocol and subtle choreography. The visiting envoy from Ming, China has seen his fair share of court performances back home. But here, now, the rhythm is off by his standards. Or maybe it's just different. There's no crescendo, no dramatic turns, just slow, layered meaning and very quiet toe taps. The performance you're watching now may be based on Hyangak Jongjae indigenous Korean dances set to native music, as opposed to Dangak Jongjae, which borrowed heavily from Tang Dynasty Chinese styles. This distinction might seem academic to you, but to these diplomats, it's everything. If they praise the wrong one, they risk insulting the host. If they misinterpret a step, they could accidentally comment on the king's legitimacy or imply a critique of Confucian harmony. So they watch very carefully. One envoy, reportedly, once mistook a symbolic turning of the body for an intentional snub. That turned into 3 days of apology poetry and a very uncomfortable shared meal involving pickled radish and language barriers. Historians still argue whether the confusion was real or just a political excuse to avoid trade terms. And you're trying to follow the plot. If there is a plot, one dancer mimics the swaying of a willow branch, another tilts her head like a crane listening to distant thunder. There's definitely a message here. Possibly, spring is coming, or the palace roof needs fixing. It's not clear. What is clear is that movement here means something. Every gesture is choreographed to the syllable. There's a concept in traditional Korean aesthetics called jongjeongdong, which translates loosely to calm on the outside, motion within. The dance isn't flashy, but the intensity simmers beneath the surface like a simmering pot of poetry. You start to feel it, the rhythm of the stillness, the eloquence and restraint. It's like watching a flower bloom in slow motion. But the flower is a metaphor, and the soil is made of Confucian ideals. Meanwhile, the Dutch envoy from earlier is definitely regretting his decision to wear wool in July. He shifts, just slightly, and 2 of the court interpreters glance at him with the speed and precision of trained falcons. One dancer steps forward. She lifts both arms in a soft arc. The motion is so subtle it could be mistaken for a shrug, but the kind of shrug that says, I'm embodying harmony through the gesture of rain falling on ancient pines. You blink. She blinks. This may have been a challenge, and then a bow, not a little bob, a full, slow descent that makes you feel like you've been knighted, judged, and forgiven in the space of 3 seconds. The diplomats stand, startled. You remain seated, mostly because you've lost sensation in your knees. A flute note warbles gently in the background. The tiger instrument growls once. Softly, you exhale, unsure when you last inhaled. You think you understand now why these performances confused so many outsiders. They're not meant to be understood in a literal sense. They're meant to be absorbed, like steam from a hot bath or the emotional plotline of a really good teabag commercial. There's a quirky fact buried here. Some dances were only performed once per decade, not because they were too complex, but because they were considered spiritually potent. The court feared overuse would dilute their meaning or anger the ancestors. Can you imagine a Broadway show only performed every 10 years because the curtain offended the heavens? And yet, here, it made sense. It's also worth noting that some dances were designed with foreign audiences in mind, but not necessarily to please them, more like to confuse them just enough to establish cultural dominance. Welcome to our court, the movement seems to say. We invented an entire language of elbows. Good luck keeping up. A gong rings out again, soft and measured. The dancers retreat. This time, the diplomats clap more earnestly. The Dutch envoy bows too deeply and nearly headbutts the Ming ambassador. A minor disaster is averted with the aid of a folding screen and a lot of polite coughing. You are still on the floor. You've just watched one of the most carefully choreographed exchanges of political messaging, spiritual symbolism, and theatrical stoicism in recorded history, and it still makes more sense than your last office meeting. You lean back, just slightly, against a carved pillar. It smells like centuries of incense and quiet secrets. And somewhere, across the courtyard, a drum beats once soft and slow, like the world exhaling. By now, you've accepted a few core truths. 1. Your legs will never recover. 2. Nobody claps until they're absolutely sure it's over. And 3. Ancient Korean court dances are both the most elegant thing you've ever seen and a deeply committed exercise in confusing your brain. The next performance begins before you realize it. There's no fanfare, just a quiet procession of dancers in robes that rustle like paper lanterns brushing together in the wind. Their slippers are impossibly thin, too thin. You look closer and realize, with some degree of alarm, that they're not wearing proper shoes at all. They're dancing in paper shoes, not metaphorical ones, real ones, made of mulberry bark fiber, meticulously crafted to be durable enough for a single ceremonial use and no more. These are Jihwa traditional Korean paper shoes used in formal court settings, especially during performances. And yes, the dancers glide across stone and wood in these fragile creations with the kind of confidence you reserve for waterproof boots and solid insurance policies. You lean in. One dancer performs a slow turn, her heel brushing the floor with the softness of a sigh. Not a scuff, not a tear. The shoe holds. You almost applaud out of sheer respect for the shoemaker. Here's your historical fact. These paper shoes were often custom-made for dancers and ceremonial figures. The material hanji, a strong, fibrous paper, was prized for its flexibility and surprising strength. Still, they weren't made to last. In fact, the destruction of the shoes over time was part of the aesthetic. Ephemeral beauty, the perfect step that fades. One dancer pauses mid-step. You can see the faint imprint of her toes through the sole. It's delicate. It's poetic. It's also mildly terrifying because that floor is not particularly forgiving. You picture yourself trying the same routine and falling flat on your face somewhere around step 2, probably after stepping on your own robe. But the dancers are unbothered. Their faces remain serene. Their bodies move like brush strokes, smooth, intentional, slightly unreadable. Now for your quirky tidbit. There was once a dancer who became so well known for her ability to perform gyeonggi, a graceful regional style of court movement, without creasing her shoes, that she was gifted an official title by the royal court, Keeper of the Immaculate Soul. The title didn't come with land or money, but it did come with a very nice jade hairpin and a story that outlived her by centuries. Some scholars still argue whether she actually existed or whether she was a fusion of several dancers' legends. Either way, her story gets retold at palace tours, in whispered museum corners, and by old calligraphy teachers with suspiciously good posture. Back in the performance, the paper shoes skim across the polished wood stage with a rhythm that's half lullaby, half metronome. You start to notice the sound, the tiniest crunch, like dried leaves on silk. It's subtle, barely audible under the soft drumbeat and echoing flute, but it's there, a reminder of fragility beneath the pageantry. Suddenly, a dancer lifts one foot just a bit too high. Everyone watches. The shoe doesn't rip, but the moment hangs in the air like a held breath. And then she lands gracefully, silently. The crisis is averted. You swear the diplomats across the aisle also exhaled in unison. The Ryukyu envoy, who has not yet blinked in 2 full dances, finally adjusts his seat. His expression is that of a man who has learned to respect footwear on a metaphysical level. There's a rhythm to this experience, now slow gestures, dramatic pauses, deliberate steps, but it's also a kind of test. You're watching an art form that's all about what doesn't happen, a dance where the smallest misstep can rupture the mood, the rhythm, even the shoes. Court officials in the corner begin scribbling notes, whether on the performance or the reaction of the foreign guests. You're not sure, possibly both. This is more than entertainment. It's a diplomatic diagnostic tool in full regalia. You, meanwhile, start to wonder what these dancers do in their off hours. Do they stretch? Do they laugh? Do they ever just throw on socks and shuffle around? It's hard to imagine. Each movement seems like the product of a lifetime's training, like they were born already knowing how to bow in 5 different tempos. You spot the tiniest crack in one shoe's sole. The dancer adjusts. Crisis averted again. In these dances, nothing is wasted. A flick of the wrist carries meaning. A raised chin signals respect, restraint, or subtle challenge. And those shoes so frail, so firm are a metaphor wrapped around a foot. By the end of the sequence, the floor is scattered with near-invisible traces of use fibers barely holding on. Evidence of grace under pressure. The dancers line up for their final pose. A slow bow with arms curved like open fans. The sleeves flutter. The shoes hold. There's no music now. Just silence, heavy and proud. The bow finishes. The dancers withdraw. And finally, someone breathes. The Ming ambassador tilts his head in an almost smile. The Ryukyu envoy claps just once, carefully. The Dutch envoy, overwhelmed by the intensity of the paper shoe choreography, writes something in his notebook. It's probably just don't laugh. You shift your legs. You're pretty sure one has fallen asleep permanently. But your mind is wide awake, full of fluttering sleeves, silent steps, and the quiet suspense of shoes made of paper. You're not sure how much time has passed. The light filtering through the palace shutters has changed, shifting from warm gold to a soft, pewter haze. Somewhere in the background, a gong is struck so slowly it feels more like a suggestion than a sound. And just as you begin to wonder if this next segment might involve more dramatic sleeve twirling or surprise fans, in walk the choreographers. Now, these are not dancers. These are the people who tell dancers how to move, and they enter with the energy of people who haven't smiled since their certification ceremony. Their robes are immaculate, starched in places you didn't know could be starched. Their brows are furrowed, not with stress, but with the sheer gravity of their own taste. One particularly tall official walks with a scroll in one hand and a jade pointer in the other. He pauses mid-courtyard, looks upward as if consulting the choreography spirits, and then performs a miniature bow so intricate you wonder if his neck has joints you weren't born with. This, dear viewer, is the Royal Jung, or Court Dance Director, a title with responsibilities that include overseeing rehearsals, maintaining historical accuracy, and, one presumes, staring judgmentally at sleeves. You now understand a historical fact. In the Joseon court, the choreographers weren't assistants. They were high-ranking artists with bureaucratic power. Their job wasn't just to make dances. It was to interpret royal vision into bodily movement, to translate Confucian ideals into choreography. If a dance didn't express the right emotion or historical reference, it could reflect badly on the entire palace. And while you may have once imagined choreographers as breezy artists with silk scarves, these figures are more like stern librarians who learned martial arts in their spare time. One of them begins pacing across the stage, marking movements with a handheld bamboo pointer. Another assistant follows behind, noting foot positions with pebbles. You're now watching a rehearsal within a performance, within a cultural statement. It's all very meta and surprisingly tense. They call forth 2 dancers, young men in pale blue robes, trying to look confident while sweating through their collars. The choreographer hums, not a tune, just a sound, a diagnostic sound. Then, like a maestro conducting a concerto made entirely of body language, he begins tweaking. A hand lifts too quickly, he shakes his head. A bow arcs too wide, he clicks his tongue. A sleeve flips slightly to the left instead of the right, and he physically repositions the dancer with the gentleness of a sculptor rearranging clouds. You learn now that ancient court dances weren't static traditions. They evolved, slowly, respectfully, but with intent. Different kings preferred different styles. Some liked dramatic, high-motion dances with multiple formations. Others wanted spiritual simplicity. A single choreographer could make or break an entire generation's artistic legacy. The stakes, somehow, are both ephemeral and enormous. Here's your quirky tidbit. One royal choreographer in the 18th century was so obsessed with balance that he allegedly wouldn't approve any dance until he watched it performed in absolute silence, without music, 4 times in a row backwards. His journals include notes like insufficient serenity at third toe and gesture lacks appropriate goose gravitas. Historians still argue whether he was an aesthetic genius or just someone who hadn't slept in a few decades. You look around the court, the dancers, the choreographers, the musicians, they're all operating on a system of gestures and glances so well practiced it feels like a second language. And it is, really, a movement language, one in which a hand to the chest isn't just emotion, it's loyalty. A sideways tilt of the head isn't confusion, it's sorrow. A flick of the fan, that might be flirtation, or an allegory for national defense. Your modern brain is trying to map this in real time. You wish there were subtitles or a handy guidebook. What that sleeve meant. Vol. Suddenly, one dancer stumbles. Not a fall, just a misstep. A foot that should have been lifted to toe height lands slightly heel first. It's barely noticeable, but the choreographer sees it. The entire rehearsal freezes. Everyone looks at the dancer. The dancer looks at the floor. The choreographer breathes in very deeply, and then he adjusts the scroll. He doesn't scold. He doesn't frown. He simply changes the position of a tiny ink mark and says, quietly, "Then we'll make that the new standard." The dancer exhales like he's just been pardoned from a spiritual tax audit. This is something no one tells you about ancient court choreographers. They were strict, yes, but also incredibly adaptive. They had to be. One dancer sprains an ankle mid-performance, re-choreograph the entire finale. The king suddenly decides he doesn't like sleeve flipping on Thursdays. Rewrite the poem. A bird flies overhead during a crucial bow. It's now part of the narrative. Art, in this palace, is alive. You catch a glimpse of one of the foreign diplomats whispering into a fan. You can only imagine the reports being written. Performance appears to involve a stern man with a stick arguing with clouds, unsure if symbolic or literal. You, however, are spellbound. This isn't just a rehearsal. It's a glimpse behind the velvet curtain, into a world where every toe placement is a conversation with history. The dancers return to position. They try again. This time, the steps are smoother. The motion flows. The sleeve turns like a sail catching wind, and the choreographer nods. You feel, somehow, like you've passed an exam you didn't know you were taking. As the scrolls are rolled up and the pebbles collected, you wonder what it must be like to hold a nation's philosophy in your hands, to orchestrate a palace's worth of meaning in 3 slow steps and a measured glance. And then the gong sounds again, soft, unhurried. The dancers bow not just to the choreographer, but to the floor, the air, the past. You follow suit, your own bow a little lopsided, but full of admiration. Just when you think you've seen every possible variation of slow-motion elegance and eyebrow choreography, the dancers return wearing outfits that can only be described as equal parts majestic and unreasonably complicated. One performer has a belt wider than your torso. Another is balancing a headpiece that looks like a golden pagoda mated with a jewelry box. You think you spot tassels that have their own tassels. There's something suspicious about how shiny everything is. You squint. The threads in their robes are metallic, not just decorative woven into the fabric. Gold and silver threads shimmer as they move, catching even the faintest glimmer of light. It's like watching sunlight bow. Here comes your historical fact. Joseon court dance costumes weren't merely aesthetic. They conveyed rank, story, and even emotion. Dancers performing tales of grief wore muted blues and grays. Dances celebrating harvest or peace burst with saffron, green, and coral, and those metallic threads. Real, often imported. Expensive. If the court ran out of gold thread, performances were postponed. That's how seriously they took shimmer. Of course, these weren't outfits you tossed on 5 minutes before curtain call. No, dancers required help. Sometimes teams to assemble the full regalia. There's one documented case of a costume being so intricate it took 2 full hours to put on, including 17 ornamental hairpins and a strategically placed jade comb, said to ward off stage fright. You're watching one such performance now. The dance seems slow even by royal standards, but that's partly because turning too quickly would probably launch an earring into orbit. Every movement is calculated, each wrist flick, each shoulder tilt, a battle between aesthetic poetry and wardrobe malfunction. A dancer lifts her arms. You count no less than 4 layers of sleeves, each embroidered with peonies, cranes, and something that may be either clouds or aggressively stylish turnips. Then she moves, and somehow, none of it tangles. It's mesmerizing, also slightly suspicious. You start to wonder if the palace has a secret wardrobe priesthood, whose entire job is to exorcise knots and ensure silk behaves under pressure. This brings us to your quirky tidbit. The Joseon palace had full-time costume attendants, some of whom specialized solely in headgear balance. That's right. There were experts whose job description included ensures the golden blossom crown does not tilt left during Act 3. It said, one such attendant developed a 6th sense for symmetry and could detect a crooked hairpin from 20 paces. Historians still argue whether this was based on actual training or just a very dramatic family legend retold over rice wine. Meanwhile, in your current reality, you're marveling at a particularly ambitious outfit, a robe with dragons woven so realistically, their whiskers seem to shimmer independently. The dancer moves with slow, serpentine precision, and for a moment, the dragons appear to chase one another around her shoulders. One diplomat Dutch, again, is clearly overwhelmed. He removes his glasses, cleans them, and replaces them with a sigh that suggests both admiration and resignation. This is not a culture that messes around with accessories. The dance tells a story. Although, as usual, it's hard to decipher if it's about love, harvest, or perhaps the tragic life of a very fashionable crane. There's a soft gasp in the audience. A dancer has just knelt while keeping her train perfectly arranged behind her. That may not sound impressive to you, but she did it while wearing sleeves that reach the floor and a collar that could double as a picnic blanket. One wrong fold and she would have looked like a collapsed wardrobe. Instead, it's grace incarnate. The musicians adjust tempo ever so slightly. A soft flute note echoes against the silk banners. The room feels like it's breathing in slow motion. Then comes a delicate turn, and you catch sight of the dancer's feet barely peeking out from beneath the embroidery. The shoes are covered in the same fabric as the robe. This is known as high-E, and yes, those are also hand-stitched. You realize now, from headpiece to hem, nothing is out of place, and yet, somehow, not a single person looks uncomfortable. You, on the other hand, have a wrinkle in your tunic and feel like a swamp creature by comparison. This performance appears to be Chunengjun, the dance of the spring nightingale. It's one of the few solo court dances still performed today, celebrated for its grace, detail, and incredibly specific posture requirements. Originally created to honor the king, it involves precise steps, carefully placed gazes, and a deeply poetic appreciation for birds that may or may not have been metaphorical bureaucrats. According to legend, one king was so moved by the dancer's mimicry of a bird preening in moonlight that he composed a poem on the spot. The poem was then stitched into the hem of the dancer's robe for future performances. Scholars debate whether this story is true, or just the 18th century version of a flattering TikTok comment. Either way, it's very on-brand. The performance winds down with a motion so gentle it's almost invisible. A small tilt of the head, a closing of the fan, a lowering of the arms as if to say, that's all, and also everything. There is silence. Then a bow. The applause is soft, respectful. The diplomats nod in unison, clearly still processing the choreography, the embroidery, and possibly their own existential crises. You're still staring at the dancers' robes, half convinced they're alive. As the performers exit, the silk ripples like water disappearing into shadow. You're left with the scent of incense, the memory of dragons, and the deep belief that no one should ever underestimate the emotional power of 12 strategically placed tassels. The performance space empties again, the dancers retreating like waves folding back into a calm sea, and you finally risk adjusting your posture. One leg groans like a disgruntled civil servant. You ignore it. You're too curious about what's coming next. A hush falls, deeper than before, and then one dancer enters. Just one. No dramatic robes, no glittering dragons, no weaponized sleeves. She's dressed in something simple, muted pastel silk, a narrow sash, no headpiece. At first, you think she might be an assistant, maybe someone sweeping up the memory of the last dance. Then the music begins so soft it might be your own pulse, and she moves. You blink. She's not dancing like the others. Her steps are sharp, then fluid. Her gaze isn't fixed on the horizon like before, but focused, piercing, alive. You realize this is no gentle depiction of birdsong or cloud worship. This is a message, one meant to be understood, and maybe even questioned. Welcome to the part of the court dance experience where every gesture hides a loaded phrase, where one raised elbow might mean peace, and two in sequence might mean you're on thin ice. Boy. Here's your historical fact. Many Korean court dances weren't abstract performances. They were choreographed commentary. Some were direct political statements, coded critiques of foreign powers, visual praise of virtuous officials, or even internal messages about succession and royal favor. This particular one might be Gyeomu, the Korean sword dance. Though often seen in military ceremonies or folk contexts, variants of it were adapted for the court. In this version, the dancer doesn't carry a sword, but her movements mimic its weight, its arc, its threat. Historians still argue whether these dances were intended to subtly intimidate, or if foreign diplomats simply felt intimidated because they were being stared down by someone in silk who moved like a cat with a law degree. You glance toward the visitors. The Ryukyu envoy is alert now, his fan forgotten on his lap. The Dutchman is still scribbling notes, possibly something like, "She just blinked. I think I blinked back. Was that diplomatic?" The dancer's motion becomes increasingly deliberate. Each step falls like punctuation. She tilts her head slightly to the left, pauses, then steps diagonally with a snap of her wrist. It's subtle, but if you're paying attention, and by now, you absolutely are, it feels like you're watching a conversation without words. You recall a scroll from earlier. One of the palace interpreters explained it in hushed tones. In diplomatic audiences, specific dances were sometimes selected not to entertain, but to clarify a royal stance. One dance featured the movement of a turtle turning away from the sun. This was understood to mean, your emperor is not as bright as he thinks he is. Polite, poetic shade. Another told the myth of a plum tree whose roots withered after too much water. Translation: you're overstepping. Step back or lose everything. This solo performance feels like one of those, a series of flowing gestures, interrupted by moments of stillness so intense you can hear someone's stomach growl 3 rows over. Here's your quirky tidbit. There was once a diplomat from Joseon who, when visiting the Qing court, accidentally offended a royal concubine by mimicking a dance gesture he'd seen at home. What he thought was a polite hand wave apparently resembled a Qing court insult. The situation was resolved, eventually, but not before he was temporarily reassigned to cabbage storage duties. International politics is a delicate thing, especially when performed with fingers. Back in the courtyard, the dancer begins the final passage of her routine. It's a slow circling motion, her arms tracing shapes in the air. Some say these are symbols: the circle of heaven, the square of earth, the triangle of loyalty. Others claim she's mimicking the turning seasons or the cycle of karma. Still others, and you may be joining this camp, believe she's just showing off how flawlessly she can pirouette in fabric that weighs more than a full tea service. The dance ends, not with a bow, but with a simple stillness. She stands, head high, arms low, eyes forward. She doesn't move, and for several long moments, neither does anyone else. Finally, the drum gives one soft beat. She bows, minimal and powerful, and glides away. The silence holds. Even the birds seem too impressed to chirp. You don't clap. You feel like clapping would be too loud, too much. This wasn't a performance. It was a statement wrapped in choreography and sealed with eye contact. You think about all the things that dance might have meant. You think about what she didn't say, and how that somehow said more, and you realize something profound and gently funny. In this court, entire political conversations happen at a quarter. The speed of walking, and with 300% more embroidery. Somewhere behind you, the Dutch envoy finally exhales. You're right there with him. Your sense of time is beginning to wobble. You're not sure if you've been here an hour or a century, but everything outside this courtyard, the noise, the rush, the concept of emails has melted into silk and flute notes. You're fully immersed now, a semi-stunned guest in a palace where nothing happens quickly. And yet somehow, everything happens exactly when it should. And now, just when you expect more solemn dances or a stern return of the golden-robed swirlers, someone enters carrying a goose. Yes, a literal goose, carved from wood, lacquered, painted, and carried with reverence as if it's a sacred urn filled with ancestral wisdom or the royal tea stash. You blink. You are not hallucinating. There it is, the ceremonial goose. You are now entering the most allegorical section of the evening. Here's your historical fact. In many East Asian traditions, geese symbolized loyalty and marital harmony. In Korean rituals, especially weddings and diplomatic ceremonies, the presentation of a gyeoran, a stylized wooden goose, was a formal gesture of peace, trust, and commitment. The idea was that wild geese mate for life, travel great distances, and return to the same nesting grounds each year, a fitting metaphor for alliance or very committed paperwork. Tonight, though, the goose is the centerpiece of a dance. The performers glide in behind it, clad in robes dyed in twilight shades, soft purples, smoky blues, deep silvers. One carries a tray of scrolls, another holds a bundle of reeds. You've entered the realm of the symbol-heavy ceremonial dance, where objects speak louder than gestures, and gestures are still somehow louder than words. The goose is placed center stage with great care, facing exactly northwest, possibly because of symbolism, possibly because of a draft. The dancers begin a slow, swaying routine around it, circling like moons around a wooden, feathered sun. Their movements are gentle but deliberate. Arms open, close, open again, mimicking wings. Knees bend in wide arcs, as if preparing for flight. You begin to suspect that this is a retelling of a migration story. Then comes the moment that shifts everything. One dancer breaks formation. She approaches the goose, kneels before it, and offers a silk ribbon. The audience goes still. A diplomat coughs, immediately regrets it. You hold your breath. The dancer steps back. Another enters and places a second ribbon, this one embroidered with a peony. A third offers a tiny wooden flute. Suddenly, it clicks. This isn't a performance about geese. It's a metaphorical petition. This quirky tidbit is one of those that sounds made up, but was recorded by court scribes in enough variations to seem likely. During particularly tense diplomatic periods, such as before the Imjin Wars or amid succession debates, the Joseon court would commission dances that acted as polite, plausible deniability-laced reminders to foreign envoys. The goose, in these moments, was the stand-in for peaceful cooperation. Place an offering. You're part of the harmony. Ignore it. You're making a statement and not a flattering one. Historians still argue whether the goose was ever ignored deliberately or whether someone once just didn't understand they were supposed to interact with it. One story tells of a Japanese ambassador who, unfamiliar with the ritual, thought the goose was a decorative hat stand and accidentally leaned his parasol on it. The resulting diplomatic ice age lasted 3 luncheons. Tonight's performance avoids such drama. The dancers complete their offerings. The music shifts to a soft, rippling rhythm flutes, kayagum, a low jangu drum beating like a polite knock at destiny's door. Then the goose is lifted again, slowly, slowly, as if it weighs more now, heavy with symbolic hope and subtle political reminders. It is carried away like a departing envoy, with grace, mystery, and just the faintest squeak of lacquer on wood. As the dancers retreat, you can't help but feel the strange weight of it all. It's a prop. Yes, a painted chunk of tree, but it also carried centuries of layered meaning. In this court, everything means something. Every ribbon holds a backstory. Every step whispers a proverb. Even birds, especially symbolic ones, can carry a message across borders without saying a single word. You look at the foreign envoys. Their expressions are a blend of admiration and nervous calculation. The Ryukyu delegate makes a discreet note, possibly, respect the bird. You, however, are simply enchanted. You've just watched an entire geopolitical allegory performed with the grace of a lullaby and the narrative clarity of interpretive dance, starring a wooden goose. It's the kind of evening that reminds you, history is not just war and treaties and men in big hats arguing over maps. Sometimes, it's the careful placement of a carved bird and the soft folding of sleeves that speak louder than armies. The courtyard is quiet again. You lean back, the scent of pine lacquer lingering in the air, and imagine the goose resting somewhere behind the curtain, satisfied, smug, and perfectly symbolic. You're not sure what's coming next, but you're almost certain it won't top the goose. And then sleeves. So many sleeves. They pour into the courtyard like a silk tide, flowing out from dancers who seem to exist solely to prove that fabric can express emotion. You count at least 12 performers, all in matching robes the color of early morning fog. Their sleeves, longer than your self-esteem during adolescence. It's an ocean of cloth. You realize, with a mix of awe and cautious amusement, that you're about to witness one of the court's most technically demanding and sleep-defyingly slow dances, the sleeve performance. There's no official name. It goes by many titles: Seryongmu, Polguryang, Chukwanmu, depending on the era, the court, and whether the sleeves are meant to mimic clouds, riverbanks, or the emotional trajectory of a particularly sensitive pine tree. Tonight, the theme seems to be the soul of the wind, as told through advanced drapery. Here's your historical fact. Sleeves weren't just decorative in Korean court dances, they were communicative tools. In some performances, the movement of the sleeve was the message. Slow rolls of the wrist signaled trust, upward flutters meant longing, and crossing the sleeves before the chest conveyed humility or quiet grief. It's like Morse code, but in silk and without the beeping. The dancers begin. There's no sudden start, just a gentle rising of arms, like mist lifting off a lake. Then, flutter, twist, fold, unfold. It's mesmerizing. You're not even sure if they're moving, or if time has slowed to match the rhythm of their garments. And here's your quirky tidbit. One court record from the 17th century mentions a dancer whose sleeves were so long they accidentally swept a candle off its pedestal during a performance. No one said anything. The king simply ordered the candle to be considered symbolically extinguished and had the ashes left in place for the rest of the ceremony. That dancer, promoted. Historians still argue whether the candle incident was accidental or a choreographed metaphor for impermanence. It's a toss-up. You're watching now as the dancers swirl into a soft spiral. Their sleeves brush one another, forming petal shapes in midair before collapsing back into lines. The sound of the silk swishing is audible barely, but it's there, like a whisper made of water. One dancer breaks rank. Her sleeves drift upward as if caught by an invisible breeze. Then she spins, arms extended, and for a split second, you see it. A perfect circle made of motion. The other dancers copy her, each creating their own ripple. The courtyard becomes a pond. You are the pebble. The foreign dignitaries are transfixed. Even the usually stoic Ming ambassador leans slightly forward. The Dutch envoy, bless him, has completely stopped writing and is just staring, mouth slightly open, like he's reconsidering everything he thought he knew about sleeves. Then comes the part where your brain short-circuits. The dancers kneel. All at once, their sleeves pool around them in waves. The silk continues to move, coasting across the polished floor with momentum that seems supernatural. It's like the fabric has its own soul. You half expect one sleeve to rise up and recite a poem. And now, the formation changes. Two dancers in the center stand. Their sleeves are narrower, more tailored. Their movements become sharper. You realize they represent messengers, human ones, this time relaying information through elegant, ritualized gesture. The outer dancers mirror them, sleeves wider, flowing, echoing the message but softening it. This is court diplomacy in sleeve form. The inner circle speaks plainly. The outer circle interprets, dilutes, reframes, like an ancient game of politely exaggerated telephone. And here's the kicker. This entire thing was once performed in near silence. No drums, no flutes, just the sound of silk on silk, the occasional cough from an unlucky ambassador, and the deep, vibrating silence of unspoken expectations. You glance across the courtyard. The Ryukyu envoy is nodding rhythmically. The Dutchman's pen has rolled off his lap and been abandoned. The Korean scribes in the back are writing furiously, possibly recording the sleeve angles for future use in poetry or legal precedent. You, meanwhile, are fully hypnotized. There's something deeply soothing about it. The rhythm is unhurried. The message is unclear, but that's fine. You're no longer trying to understand. You're letting yourself absorb, like a stone soaking in moonlight, or a cat watching a slow ceiling fan. The final motion is a closing. The dancers fold their sleeves inward, one precise fold at a time, until their hands disappear entirely. Then they bow not with their heads, but with their shoulders, sloping gently forward like a tree bowing to wind. It's the most elegant shrug you've ever seen. And then it's done. No music cues the ending. No curtain drops. The dancers simply stop. The fabric goes still. The air stops shimmering. It is quiet. Someone exhales. You think it might be you. The sleeves have spoken. You're just not sure in what language. And honestly, that's perfectly okay. You don't even pretend to predict what's next anymore. At this point, you've witnessed dancers mimicking birds, petitioning geese, and arm gestures so poetic they could have authored their own novel. So, when a group of officials enters the courtyard and begins casually tapping the floor with long sticks, you just nod slowly and think, yes, of course, stick tapping. But the music doesn't start. The performers don't appear. Instead, you hear something odd, a rhythm, faint, steady, and it's not coming from the stage. It's coming beneath it. At first, you think it's your imagination. Maybe your leg's fallen asleep again and is doing its own interpretive footwork. But then the taps begin to layer higher tones, lower thumps, a pulse, like the heartbeat of an old wooden palace. You're hearing the hidden drummers. Here's your historical fact. In some court performances, especially those with deeply ritualistic or mythological themes, the percussion wasn't performed openly. Instead, drummers were positioned beneath raised stages or behind decorative screens, providing the aural atmosphere without ever being seen. It was part of the mystical illusion. The music didn't come from humans. It came from the world itself. Tonight, that illusion is working overtime, because the sound you're hearing now is not just percussion. It's voice, breath, syncopation. It's subtle enough that most of the foreign guests don't even realize it's live. One Qing delegate tilts his head as if trying to locate a particularly determined cricket. Then, the dancers arrive. Slow steps, bare feet, simple robes. No fans, no sleeves, just human forms and the beat beneath them. Their motions are restrained, but rhythmic. They step in time with the invisible music, bodies swaying slightly ahead of each thump like reeds predicting the wind. It's hypnotic, intimate, almost off-script. And here's your quirky tidbit. One legend tells of a prince who once snuck into the drummer's tunnel before a festival just to understand the rhythm better. He was caught, of course, but when questioned by his father, the king, he defended himself by saying, "How can I be a ruler if I do not hear the roots of the kingdom's dance?" He was not punished. He was made assistant choreographer for 1 whole month and hated it. History is unclear whether he ever went back. Historians still debate whether this event happened or whether it was a parable told to remind students not to mess with royal percussionists. You look now at the stage differently, not just as a performance space, but as a kind of resonant instrument. The dancers aren't just moving across it. They're responding to it. The hidden drummers are guiding the choreography from below, literally shaping the performance unseen. It's more than music. It's a metaphor. Because isn't that what so much of the court is? Power beneath the surface. Rituals dictated by unseen hands. Polite gestures covering careful orchestration. One dancer pauses, then slides forward with a smooth, rolling motion of the foot. The percussion beneath shifts. A double beat, a pause, a breath. Another dancer joins, echoing the step in reverse. You realize they're dancing a dialogue, not to an external melody, but to each other's motion and the timing of the subterranean drums. It's a language without lyrics, a negotiation, a duet, moderated by someone you'll never see. You spot one of the court officials watching intently from the side, his fan twitching at each change in rhythm. He's either keeping time or trying to cool down from sheer admiration. And now, the formation changes again. 4 dancers in a square, one in the center. The center dancer stands still, perfectly balanced, as the others circle. Each step is a soft thump matched by a corresponding echo from beneath the floor. The wood sings faintly with each landing. There's no grand spin, no dramatic finale. The climax of this performance is a shared stillness. 5 dancers, 5 beats, one silent moment where everything aligns. Then, release. The dancers step back. The central figure bows deeply not to the king, not to the diplomats, but to the floor, to the source of the rhythm, to the unseen. And that's the quiet mic drop of ancient Korean choreography. The moment where what you didn't see mattered most. The foreign envoys look mildly alarmed, as though they were supposed to have made an offering and missed the cue. The Dutchman is frantically trying to recall whether floor acknowledgement is an insult or a compliment in this culture. You just sit there, reverent and slightly giddy, because you've just witnessed the world's quietest drum solo, performed by people who weren't even on stage. And somehow it was glorious. By now, your body has entered that curious state where your legs are entirely numb, but your soul feels strangely well fed. Your spine may not forgive you for this evening, but your inner historian is absolutely glowing. The courtyard is quiet again, the last whispers of hidden drums fading into the air like breath in cold mist. Then slowly, softly poetry arrives, not spoken, not sung, but danced. A group of 6 performers step into view, each holding a scroll, long, thin, and trailing like silk ribbons. The scrolls are more than just props. They're the entire story. Here's your historical fact. In Korean court rituals, poetry wasn't just written, it was enacted. Many Jongjae court dances were developed directly from verse. The choreography was crafted line by line. Each movement, a physical interpretation of a specific image or metaphor. A dancer might bow to a mountain, spin like a falling petal, or lift an arm just as a poem mentions spring rain. Tonight's dance is one of those. You don't know the poem, but you feel it. The first dancer unrolls her scroll as she glides forward, letting it flutter to the floor. The text is calligraphy so delicate it looks like it could drift off the page. She takes 3 steps and turns. Behind her, another dancer mirrors her exactly, but in reverse. You realize, with a sleepy smile, that you're watching a poetic mirror, a dance where each performer reflects another, line by line. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some poems used in these dances were deliberately ambiguous. The court scholars would write verses packed with double meanings, moral lessons, cloaked in metaphor, veiled political commentary, or odes to kings that also gently reminded them not to get too proud. The dancers, of course, had to perform all these layers without looking like they were smirking. Historians still argue whether the infamous Willow Bows Twice dance was a subtle rebuke of a tax policy or simply about trees. The dancers now form pairs. One kneels, scroll open across her lap like a pond. The other moves around her, describing with her hands the words now embodied in silk. There's no music for this part, just the faint brushing of fabric and the occasional ripple of parchment. And then sound returns. Aegum, the traditional Korean bamboo flute, starts to play from somewhere off stage. Its tone is airy, ethereal, like someone trying to sing a memory they barely remember. The notes drift through the courtyard like petals on wind, and the scrolls flutter and sink. You watch as one dancer slowly raises her arm, letting the scroll lift in the breeze. The text is visible for only a second. It says, 1,000 springs in one step. You don't know what it means. You don't need to. You feel it. This is the genius of court dance poetry. It isn't about understanding. It's about resonance. The same way a song from childhood doesn't need lyrics to make you tear up. These performances whisper directly to your subconscious, and now the formations grow more elaborate. 4 dancers step in time, forming a compass. North bows to east, west gestures to south. Their scrolls arc around one another like weaving birds. You glance at the diplomats. They are trying. They are writing, nodding, possibly even haikuing in panic. The Dutch envoy, to his credit, seems to have stopped resisting. He is now gently humming to the flute. One final motion. All 6 dancers stand in a line, scrolls unfurled and fluttering like wings. They bow. Then, with utmost care, they re-roll the scrolls backwards, one precise rotation at a time as if returning the poem to its dream. This part takes a full 2 minutes. You time it. It is riveting. And when they exit, scrolls tucked neatly beneath their arms. You feel the way one does after reading a beautiful book with no ending. Not confused, not unsatisfied, just quietly full. You lean back. The sky above the courtyard has darkened. The lanterns glow softer now. You hear the faint rustle of pine branches in the breeze, and you can't help but imagine they're whispering poetry of their own. Poetry you might dance, if only your legs weren't currently impersonating cold tofu. Your body is basically a decorative object now, folded neatly on a palace floor. But your mind is floating somewhere between enlightenment and a gentle craving for sweet rice cakes. The lanterns have been dimmed just slightly deliberately. You suspect a subtle transition, and as the shadows grow longer, the mood in the courtyard shifts once again. The musicians return, but this time they're carrying small handbells, flutes made from gourds, and something that looks suspiciously like a zither tuned by moonlight. The sound that begins isn't a melody, it's atmosphere, like a breeze moving through tall grass. Then the dancers enter only two this time, one in red, one in white. They walk in a slow, mirrored pattern, circling each other without touching. Their steps are so soft, you barely hear the floor beneath them. This is the quietest dance yet, and that, you realize, is exactly the point. Because this dance isn't about movement, it's about what movement means. Here's your historical fact. In royal Korean courts, specific dances were performed to mark decisions that weren't announced publicly. Alliances, marriages, abdications, even veiled threats. These dances often featured pairs, one symbolizing action, the other reflection, depending on which dancer initiated which gesture. The audience, especially the diplomats, would draw subtle conclusions. In other words, this was interpretive press release via chiffon. Tonight's performance may well be Jin Hyungmu, a dance known for its narrative ambiguity and its quiet back and forth between harmony and interruption. You don't know the specifics, but neither, probably, did many who watched it originally. That's part of the fun. And now, your quirky tidbit. During one particularly tense court reception in the 18th century, a visiting envoy watched this exact style of dance and became convinced he was being sent a personal message. Something about territorial boundaries and the untrustworthiness of geese. He promptly drafted a 47-line reply in poetry, which was delivered to the palace with great solemnity. The palace, of course, had no idea what he was talking about. They replied with a fruit basket and another dance, this time featuring cranes. Diplomacy achieved. Historians still argue whether the whole exchange was successful negotiation or mutual misinterpretation held together by polite metaphor. Back in the courtyard, the two dancers slowly begin to echo each other's steps more precisely. It's like watching ripples finally line up. The dancer in red raises her arm delicately. The dancer in white responds by bowing not forward, but sideways, like a tree leaning toward rain. It feels tender. The musicians add a soft bell chime. You look over at the foreign envoys. One of them is clearly tearing up. Another has removed his shoes in a spontaneous moment of respect or possibly confusion. The Dutchman, he's just smiling now, hands folded like he's watching clouds tell bedtime stories. You breathe deeply. There's something about the synchronization, the gentle acknowledgement of the other's presence, the slow circling that never becomes confrontation. You're watching peace enacted, not declared. Then the two dancers meet in the center. They stand, face to face. No movement. The music fades. They bow, not deeply, just enough. And then they leave the way they came, never turning their backs to each other, always watching, always respectful. The whole thing was under 10 minutes, but it feels like it rearranged your heartbeat. You hear someone sniff, possibly you. The court official nearby clears his throat and makes a small note on a scroll. You try to peek. All you catch is a beautifully inked character that might mean convergence, or possibly banana. You're not fluent, yet the wind picks up slightly. A candle flickers, and just like that, the dance is done. The message, whatever it was, has been sent. Whether anyone understood it? Well, that's half the tradition, because sometimes, in royal court dances, clarity is overrated. Meaning lives in the gesture, in the hesitation, in the echo. And you, motionless but deeply moved, are part of the story now. 2. At this point in the night, you are 90% stillness and 10% whispered wonder. The air is thicker now, not uncomfortably so, just filled with that hushed warmth that happens when everyone agrees not to speak too loudly. Somewhere in the distance, a night bird calls once, as if to say, "Yes, I too am watching this." And then movement again. But not dancers. Not yet. Attendants appear first, carrying small trays. On each tray, a tiny porcelain bowl filled with water. They pace slowly across the stage and place the bowls down with such ceremony that you briefly wonder if they're offerings, or perhaps part of a tea ritual, or a hydrating intermission. They retreat. Then comes the dancer, singular, serene, dressed in white, so pale it's almost glowing. She walks barefoot softly like someone stepping across freshly raked sand. In one hand, she carries a willow branch. This is new. The music begins a hagam this time. Its two-stringed notes sounding like someone gently coaxing secrets from an old violin that once had a heartbreak. She kneels in front of one of the bowls. You lean forward, uncertain. She dips the willow branch and begins to paint the air. Here's your historical fact. Water and branches were occasionally used in Korean court dances to represent purification, reflection, or transition. The act of dipping a branch into water and then flicking droplets into the air was symbolic. It might represent clearing bad omens, cleansing the court's energy, or, depending on the context, simply reminding people to be grateful for spring. The droplets scatter, catching lantern light like tiny stars. She dances with the branch, sweeping it across the air in slow, arcing gestures. Her other hand follows, mimicking the motion, creating the illusion of two dancers, the woman and her reflection. It's delicate, almost too soft to be real. And now for your quirky tidbit. In one particularly elaborate palace ritual, performers used dyed water to flick colored droplets across silk screens, creating ephemeral murals as part of the dance. It was called Eokyeongwa, the painting of blessings in air. The audience, especially foreign guests, never quite understood what they were witnessing. One Portuguese envoy wrote in his journal, "A lady flung pink rain upon us, and the king nodded. I applauded out of fear." Historians still argue whether these dances were spiritual art or elite performance stunts. Maybe both. Back in your courtyard, the dancer has moved to a second bowl. This time, her willow branch trails water over the ground in a slow, winding line. She steps in time with it, following its arc, then dips again. A flick, a pause, a spin so gentle it barely qualifies as motion, and yet you feel it in your chest. The rhythm of it is pure meditation. And it's not just about beauty. This dance has layers. The willow, for example, has multiple meanings in Korean culture. It can signify resilience, feminine energy, sorrow, or renewal. The water, always change, always reflection. Together, they form a conversation between grief and grace. You're suddenly aware that you've been breathing in rhythm with her steps. The music swells, just a little, then fades back. She kneels again, another dip. A slow bow to the bowl, and then without standing, she pivots on her knees and bows to the audience. It's not dramatic. It's quiet. So quiet it feels like the end of a lullaby. The attendants return, collect the bowls, and leave just as they came. No fanfare, no explanation. And you realize this entire dance was an interlude, a sigh between grander phrases, a moment to exhale. The envoys seem unsure whether to clap. The Ming ambassador nods solemnly. The Ryukyu delegate actually closes his eyes for a moment. The Dutchman, he lifts his hat slightly in a gesture that may or may not be diplomatic, but feels strangely appropriate. And you, well, you've just watched someone make magic out of water and a branch. You shift your weight just slightly, only to realize you've been holding the same position for 20 minutes. You stretch, just a little, quietly, respectfully, and then settle again. The stage is empty once more. The silence isn't empty, it's full. It hums with what's just happened, with water droplets still catching light behind your eyes, with a willow branch gently tracing circles in your imagination. You didn't understand everything, but you didn't need to. You felt it, and now you rest in that feeling. You think you're prepared for whatever's next. You've seen poetry turned into choreography, geese with diplomatic agendas, sleeves with the emotional range of a seasoned actor, and water flicked like blessings into moonlight. You're confident nothing could surprise you now. And then a gong, a small one, cheerful, almost mischievous. The audience collectively tilts their heads, because entering the courtyard now is not a solemn procession or a single ethereal dancer. It's a parade of people sitting down. They enter in groups of 2 or 3, dressed not in ceremonial robes but in outfits that suggest something far more radical. Comfort. The colors are soft, but not rich. The patterns are familiar, common even. These aren't dancers dressed as gods or scholars. These are people. This is the banquet scene. Here's your historical fact. Some Joseon court dances didn't depict lofty myths or political parables. They reenacted ordinary moments from noble or scholarly life gatherings, festivals, or peaceful retreats. These pieces, often presented between grander performances, gave the audience space to smile, to recognize themselves. This wasn't mythology. This was relatable choreography. The performers sit in a semicircle. They pantomime pouring tea, passing cups, eating delicacies from invisible trays. Their gestures are so precise you can almost smell the rice wine. One performer fans herself dramatically, drawing a playful giggle from another. A third pretends to spill a cup, overacting with such flair that even the stoic Ryukyu envoy cracks a polite smile. This is the court dance version of a comedy sketch, and it is immaculate. You watch as one performer, clearly the host, leans forward with exaggerated pride, miming the display of a dish. The others pantomime oohing and eyeing, then reacting dramatically to its imaginary spiciness. It's understated, choreographed humor, the kind that doesn't shout, but whispers just loud enough to make you snort into your sleeve. Here's your quirky tidbit. There was once a dance in the 18th century titled The Tea Guest's Regret that portrayed a scholar who got too tipsy at a royal feast and began praising the king's toenails. The performance was so beloved that it was repeated 3 times in one night, each time with slightly more ridiculous miming. By the 3rd round, the scholar bowed to a tree. Historians still debate whether the original story was based on a real incident or simply the best documented dad joke of the Joseon court. Tonight's performance feels like a cousin to that tradition. The music is light wooden clappers, a soft drum, the occasional peal of bells. The dancers move slowly, with just enough pause between actions to allow the joke to land. It's not slapstick. It's more like a live-action mural of daily joy. One dancer drinks from a cup and then fans herself with exaggerated elegance. Another leans over and whispers something scandalous. Silent, of course, but her fellow performer responds with a perfectly timed pretend gasp and a dropped napkin. You glance around. Even the royal scribes are smiling now. The Dutch envoy leans toward the Ming ambassador and says something that makes both men chuckle quietly. If diplomacy is a dance, this moment is its rarest move. Shared laughter. The scene progresses. Now comes the part where the musician of the group begins to pretend play a small geomungo, a traditional Korean zither. The others sway along, miming poorly timed claps and off-key humming. One performer covers her ears with theatrical despair. Another throws herself to the floor, defeated by imaginary bad rhythm. It's absurd and delightful. And just when you think it can't get more charming, the scholar falls asleep mid-toast. Right there. Head tipped back, mouth slightly open. The others gasp. Then, in perfect synchronization, they cover him with their sleeves, as though tucking in a baby bird. The audience applauds softly, not out of politeness, out of affection. Because for the first time tonight, the court dancers weren't divine. They weren't symbols. They were us, awkward, sleepy, overly dramatic humans just trying to survive a feast without spilling on themselves. The performers rise, slowly, brushing off their robes and straightening invisible place settings. They bow not to the king, not to the heavens, but toward each other, toward shared silliness, toward good company. You feel your chest loosen in the nicest way. It's a reminder, not all messages are cosmic. Sometimes, the most powerful story a dancer can tell is that we're all just people trying not to trip over our own sleeves. The performers exit, still miming the last few lines of their invisible conversation. And the courtyard stills once more. You smile, and now, as the moonlight pools across the stage, you settle deeper into yourself, grateful, maybe, for the small dance, for the soft laugh, for the scholar who definitely overshared about toenails. Just when you think the night has offered all its surprises, the lanterns dim even further. A single drum beat echoes low, deliberate, and a little unsettling in its sharpness. The performers enter slowly, this time with matching red sashes tied diagonally across their chests. Their expressions are unreadable. The air shifts. This isn't a celebration. This is the dance with a past. And the past, in this case, is controversial, because this is that dance, the one whose name has changed 3 times, whose movements were banned, restored, then reinterpreted, and which even now causes scholars to purse their lips and make noises like, well, it depends on how you translate the intention. Here's your historical fact. Certain court dances in Joseon, Korea were deemed too politically charged, too spiritually confusing, or too regionally controversial to be performed regularly. One such dance, referred to in records as bulmu, or the undone offering, was banned outright for nearly 50 years, then partially restored, only to confuse everyone again because nobody could agree on which version was correct. The dancers tonight are performing some version of it. You're not sure which one, and judging by the looks being exchanged in the diplomatic gallery, neither are the envoys. The choreography is strange, not in a bad way, but in the sense that the motions feel like they're reaching backwards. Each gesture begins smoothly, then retracts mid-air, as though the dancer is second-guessing themselves. A step forward becomes a pivot. A bow becomes an upward glance. You get the distinct feeling this dance is remembering something, and then forgetting it again. The music is sparse, plucked strings, brief percussive taps, a sound that might be a breath or a very polite gong. And now for your quirky tidbit. One interpretation of this dance claims it was originally a meditation on loss, specifically the loss of clarity, according to an old performance manual, half of which was inexplicably eaten by a cat in 1732. The dance was supposed to portray the search for meaning in that which no longer speaks, which is poetic and deeply vague. Historians still argue whether this refers to lost rituals, dead gods, or the inability to find matching socks on important occasions. The dancers circle one another now, drawing invisible shapes with their hands. You think you see a pattern, perhaps a character, or a constellation, but it dissolves before it finishes. There is frustration in this movement, but also grace, like someone trying to recall a dream that fades faster the more you chase it. Suddenly, one dancer steps to the front. He begins a fast sequence, half bows, turned wrists, spiraling turns only to halt, frozen in place, arms wide, face turned upward. Everyone else pauses. Then, slowly, the rest imitate him, a ripple of stopped motion. Then, they unwind, all together, like gears releasing, breath exhaling, tension dispersing. And just like that, the strange, looping, almost didn't happen energy of the dance resolves. They bow not low, but deeply enough to signify something ancient has just ended. And the audience, stunned, even the scribes hesitate. The Ryukyu envoy mutters something to his aide. The Dutchman scratches his chin and stares at his lap like it contains a quiz he wasn't told about. The Ming ambassador leans forward with a kind of polite disbelief, as if thinking, surely that wasn't about my emperor. Was it? You sit still, feeling like you've just watched someone fold a letter they never finished writing, kiss it goodbye, and drop it in a river. You don't know what the dance meant. You don't need to. You only know that something once forbidden has been remembered, reshaped, and let go again. And that letting go was beautiful. The dancers walk away, their steps quieter than ever. No music follows. No drumbeat lingers. The silence this time isn't restful. It's echoing, the kind of quiet that holds questions. You let it hang in the air. You don't rush to fill it. Some stories aren't told with answers. Some stories are dances, and some dances, especially the confusing, once banned, half-forgotten ones, say more by what they don't explain. The lanterns are low now, their light soft and warm, as if the palace itself is starting to drowse. Even the breeze seems to hush its steps, brushing past embroidered banners without so much as a whisper. You shift gently, no longer trying to be alert, just allowing yourself to settle. And so does the palace. This is the last dance. It begins not with a flourish or a bang, but with a breath. You hear it first, a single exhale, quiet and full of meaning. Then footsteps bare, slow, rhythmic like a lullaby. A final group of dancers enters, their robes the palest cream, like the first light of dawn, before color remembers how to bloom. They bow not to the audience, nor the king, nor each other, but to the stage, a subtle reminder this floor has seen it all. Here's your final historical fact. Some court performances at the close of an event were not designed to impress. They were for closure, dances of gratitude, of farewell, of sleep. These were sometimes called hingangmu, or departure dances. They were soft, simple, and humble, meant to honor the space, the audience, and the act of performance itself. The dancers moved slowly across the floor in a long curve, brushing their sleeves along the wood as if cleaning it with care. Each step forward is followed by a pause, a bow, and a moment of stillness. You recognize one of the gestures from earlier in the evening, a mirrored movement from the poetry dance, but here it's smaller, almost like a memory retold in a whisper. And now for your final quirky tidbit. Some royal performers used the closing dance to pay homage to past masters, repeating signature motions from earlier generations of court dancers. One record describes a final bow that imitated a famed 15th century choreographer's gentle leaning at dusk, which apparently involved tilting one's head so slowly that observers couldn't tell if it had happened at all. The maneuver was reportedly so subtle that it became a running joke in court. Don't blink, or you'll miss the entire era. Historians still argue whether this lean was choreographic genius or just a graceful neck cramp. Back in the courtyard, the dancers now move in unison, a single line, arms extended just enough to nearly touch. They step in perfect silence, not a shoe scuffs, not a robe rustles. One dancer breaks formation. She steps out, kneels, and touches the floor with her forehead. The others follow. You watch as they bow, one by one, to the stage, to the lanterns, to the silence, and then to you. It's not a grand gesture. It's a quiet acknowledgement of presence, of attention, of shared experience. And with that, they rise, not abruptly, not all at once. Like waves retreating from the shore, they melt away, gone. The music ends, or perhaps it didn't start. You can't tell anymore. The lanterns dim further. A soft bell rings once, and the night exhales. Now, let yourself drift. You're still in the courtyard, but the dancers are gone. The crowd is faded. The sounds are just echoes now. Soft footsteps, the flutter of a fan closing, the low murmur of robes brushing past your imagination. The floor beneath you is warm, the kind of warmth that comes from candlelight and shared stories. The air is still scented with sandalwood and history. You don't need to think about sleeves or scrolls or symbolic birds anymore. You've heard their stories. You've watched them unfold in the careful curve of a dancer's hand and the slow sway of a robe. You've learned that silence can speak, that movement can ask questions, that even confusion can be gentle. Let that quiet stay with you. Let your mind stop trying to remember every name, every metaphor. Let it be enough that you were here, that you saw the fans, that you felt the rhythm of something much older than clocks. You're not in a palace anymore. You're in your bed, or on your couch, or maybe somewhere in between, the place where dreams begin to stir behind your eyelids, and thoughts begin to yawn and stretch into sleep. The dancers have bowed. The court is still. You can rest now. No more drum beats, no more metaphors. Just the soft hush of your own breath, like silk folding into silk. Let the last sleeve fall. Let the lanterns dim and drift. End of script. Sweet dreams.